Hey Unexplained Ones, this is Dr. Mounts, and thanks for tuning in to All Things Unexplained, where we talk about everything from Bigfoot to UFOs to astrophysics and everything in between. So if that sort of thing is for you, make sure to follow us wherever you podcast, along with a review and a rating. It takes a lot to get All Things Unexplained on the air, and this podcast is made possible by listeners like you. You can support the show by checking us out on Linktree at ATU Podcast. That's ATU Podcast. There you'll find links to all our socials. You can support us on Venmo. You can purchase your official All Things Unexplained merchandise, and you can even book us on Cameo. And now, let's get to the show. Shout out to Blake Best, amazing composer, actor, author, talented man, for our little music here at the beginning tonight called Monsters in the Woods. You can find him on YouTube. Here, all the way from California, live and in person for the first time ever. No one has ever seen his face until tonight. It is the one and only Larry.
All Things Unexplained, hosted by Dr. Mounts, CJ Derringer, and Smitty Neeb.
Hooray! Thanks, Dad.
And now we're going to kick it straight to a special sneak preview of Season 4 of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch.
The closer that we are getting to the answers, the more covert military activity continues.
What is the military doing flying over Skinwalker Ranch?
Someone's taking an interest in what we're doing. Somebody's up on the ridge.
Right there.
This is the largest scale experiment that we've ever done here so far.
Fire! There's something in the sky.
The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. New season Tuesday, April 18th at 10 on the History Channel.
Well, if that doesn't get you excited about this episode of All Things Explained, or this season of the Skinwalker Ranch, I'm just not sure what will. Oh my gosh, I'm hooked. I've lost sleep watching the episodes lately. You guys have me literally thinking all different possibilities. We're talking orbs today. We're talking UFOs. We're talking about the history of Native American land, about land that's been owned by so many different people and what is happening there. We've got people getting sick every time the land is touched. We've got animal mutilations. I mean, we have it all coming at you. And we have special guests joining us tonight. We could not be more thankful to have Erik Bard and Thomas Winterton with us from The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch from the History Channel. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Thanks for having me on.
Yes, we've got lots of people chiming into the show already. If anybody has questions for us or for our guests, please go ahead and chime in. We will do our best to get to some towards the end of the show. And just a quick little background on our two guests today. Erik Bard is the principal investigator as well as the chief scientist at Skinwalker Ranch. And Thomas Winterton is the superintendent of the ranch. And if you've seen the show, you have seen their faces many, many times. And Erik, I have to say, you're, I think, wearing the same outfit that you wear on the show. And I'm so excited by that.
I don't know if I should admit this. Tom, should I tell him? This is all I've got.
There you go.
This is what I wear every day.
Awesome. Well, I was half expecting to see Tom's cowboy hat too. It's just so iconic for who you are on this show. But very happy to have you guys here. We're going to dive right into it. We want to be respectful of your time. And for those that have not seen the show before, can you guys tell us just a little bit about the history and mystery of Skinwalker Ranch?
So, Thomas, do you want to jump in on that one, or would you like me to start?
Go ahead and start off.
Well, you know, for those who aren't familiar with the narrative, obviously we're at a location that is known for a lot of very unusual activity. We call it anomalous. We don't like to use the word, but some people have termed it paranormal. We are talking about some of the things that you mentioned earlier, everything from UAP, UFO phenomena, as well as, um, frankly, everything in the book: portals, orbs, cryptids, meaning non-conforming biological entities. We're still exploring a whole lot of different things that are taking place here that affect our measurements. We can see them in our cameras. We can see them affecting our instruments as well as ourselves, physically. So it's definitely a place with many mysteries.
Yeah, it sure seems to be. What initially drew you? I'll start with you, Tom. What drew you to the ranch, and were you working there before the show?
Well, I mean, I was in high school at the height of the Bigelow uh, era, there in the late 90s, when a lot of the strange occurrences were taking place. And I remember going out there, taking our dates out to the gate and doing exactly what we tell people not to do. And that was jumping the gate and, walking in. Now, we only made it in maybe 50 or 100 feet before our dates were scared and clinging on tight. And that was the goal anyway. So then we'd head back to the trucks. But I really didn't follow it that closely. I'd heard the rumors around town and read the newspaper articles in the local paper, but I actually wasn't associated with it until Brandon purchased the ranch. And the first week that he purchased it, he sent his close confidant, Jim Morse, out. You probably see Jim on the show with the
Yes.
wearing the Pendleton vest.
Yes.
So Brandon sent Jim out to figure out what the heck he just purchased and start to figure out a game plan of what to do with it. And Jim actually rolled into Roosevelt. And at the time, my wife and I owned a couple of small motels. One of them happened to be there in Roosevelt. And Jim pulled in on that Sunday, and I checked him into his room. And the next day when he went to leave, we got visiting, and he found out I was a licensed contractor. And he said, I'm out here representing a guy. I can't tell you who he is, but he just purchased Skinwalker Ranch. Have you ever heard of it? And I said, yeah, I've heard of it. And he said, well, if you're a general contractor, would you mind, because I was a licensed general contractor and in the state of Utah. And so Jim asked me if I would come out and do a property inspection for him and inspect the facilities. And so the following week was my first time of going onto the ranch. And that's how I became associated with it. There was a lot of major issues that I discovered when I was doing the inspection that needed immediate attention. So I helped Brandon and Jim correct those and get those taken care of. And Brandon, where I lived there in Roosevelt, Brandon just asked me if I'd stay on and run the ranch for him. And I've been there ever since. So.
Okay, so you're local. You're a local yokel there. That's cool. And then how about you, Erik? Your background, my goodness, we could spend an entire show just going over your background in the sciences and astrophysics and such. But how did you get brought into this group?
I remember the first time I heard about Brandon's intent to purchase the ranch, and he sent me an excited text message talking about the possibility of acquiring the property, and his proposition was, how would you like to go out and do some very speculative exploratory science, on this sprawling ranch out here in northeastern Utah. And I asked him a little bit more about what it was all about. After I got a response from him, I said, "You first." In other words, I wasn't an immediate taker at all. And in fact, I remember that even after Brandon acquired the property, I probably turned down 4 or 5 invitations, politely, of course, to visit, because I couldn't imagine what could I do here.
Yeah. Has this become your full-time job now?
Well, at least in recent times, I guess you could say it has been. I have some other activities that I'm participating in, some other commercial activities. But yeah, obviously I've got a lot of boots on the ground time out here.
Okay, very cool. So how, now that you've been there, have your perceptions changed? So it sounds like neither of you really were that interested. You weren't asking to go there. You were asked to go there. How have your perceptions changed since you started?
Wow. Well, so I went on as a pretty healthy skeptic. Um, I haven't followed the paranormal space. I wasn't involved in that. And I went on thinking that there was a whole bunch of hyped stories, probably greatly exaggerated, and I didn't put a lot of stock into it. And it took me a while. I mean, right my very first time on the ranch, I had my first experience as far as feeling abnormal, feeling out of sorts. I was in the ranch house, and we were back there doing an inspection, and it felt like the room literally felt like it started to spin, and I started to feel nauseous and some vertigo, to the point that I had to back up against the wall and slide down, sit on the floor. I chalked it up as, I must have got low blood sugar, or lightheaded, something like that. But looking back, that hadn't happened before to me, and it hasn't happened anywhere else besides the ranch. So, but I went a year or maybe longer before I finally was to the point that I felt more foolish trying to explain it away with rational, mundane logic than I did just finally accepting the fact that there's things happening there that we just don't understand at this point. So my world's kind of flipped upside down in the past 7 years. I live in a different world today than I did back in 2016 when I first went on it.
Yeah, I feel that same way having done this podcast, to be honest, like an awakening almost, truly. And how about yourself, Erik?
I think the bar was set at the time of my first visit. I had attended a meeting on Brandon's invitation with some of the folks who were involved previously with the NIDS and Bass era research. You could say that the things that they shared piqued my interest, but they hardly, provided a payload of what we would call data. There was nothing compelling, just very interesting in what was shared with me. So when I finally came out, which would have been in October, I believe it was the 14th of October in 2016, I came out with a group of I want to say it was 11 individuals on site. And immediately, some very unusual things started happening. Didn't really have a bin. I didn't have a box in my mind, if you will, to put these things in. I got, I think I've related in other venues. I've shared some things that have happened with the devices that I carried. I had a phone that was misbehaving when I went to the top of the mesa, got myself away from other people, and saw this misbehavior of this device like I'd never seen before. Got out to the homestead, and it's interesting, what Thomas has described, the sense of low blood sugar, being, this vertigo sensation. There were several people who experienced that at the same time, again, attended by a malfunction. I could literally see this thing in my hands malfunctioning when I experienced mild vertigo, but others were talking about really feeling like their blood sugar had plummeted. And, that day was just, as I said, very eventful. We had someone who was very adversely medically affected, we think, by his visit to the ranch. Basically lost consciousness for about 10 minutes and ended up being, as I said, adversely affected medically for a period of about three and a half weeks. One of those mystery diagnosis type of circumstances. I don't think we ever really drilled down to what the medical cause was, but it seemed to be something neurological in his case. And then, of course, we have what Brandon has related, a sighting by Brandon and two other individuals of something, whatever it was, darting around abruptly over the mesa, fitting the description of your classic UFO or UAP. And, he tells the story obviously better than I can. Interestingly, I was right there with him and with those other two individuals looking around in the sky, unable to see whatever it was that they were all pointing to in unison. It was such a bizarre experience.
Wow. That's wild. There's been so many things on the show that have really just rocked my brain. And you've shown several people getting ill. Tom, you especially. Season 1 focused a lot on what happened to you when you guys started digging on the show. But that's just the show. You don't think about what else is happening there when the cameras aren't there. And I know Smitty had a question in regards to some of the things that are happening there as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I noticed, of course, I'm a historian, so I kind of dig into stuff and research, and there is a unusually high number of missile launch and testing sites within a 5 hour or less radius from Skinwalker Ranch. Do you believe that has anything to do with possibly the radiation levels at the ranch?
You know, the strange thing about the radiation here at the ranch is that if we just have natural radiation that's here in the environment, if it's something associated with the land, we don't expect to see transients. We don't expect to see spikes and
Right.
then the disappearance. So you do get a sense that there's a technological signature there. There's something modulating the measured radiation. But whether that has anything to do with missile launches, your guess is as good as mine. I don't find any correlations to missile launches. In fact, I'm not aware. I don't know that I've seen any of those from the perspective of the ranch.
Well, I just know I've looked, I did some research. Tokoi Rocket Test Range, the Utah Launch Complex, the Utah Test and Training Range, and Wendover Field are within 5 hours or less from the Skinwalker Ranch. And I just thought that is a high amount of places that the military has in that particular area. I just, maybe possibly they're doing some testing. They're top secret things.
You would think that would affect other areas too, though, other areas around it.
I know that we've had discussions. Another thing is I heard the number that they had tested over 1,000 atomic bombs down there at the test range in Nevada. And if you look at the jet stream and the airflows from the downwind of where that was at, the ranch is right in the path of that. And we had that discussion, I remember, right at the very beginning. And that's one of the reasons why we brought Qualtech out from Idaho and did a very thorough analysis and scan of the ranch. We got a clean bill of health from them. They didn't pick up anything that was concerning or out of the ordinary. So, based on the history of some of that activity that occurred, we did bring out experts to make sure that wasn't occurring.
I think that's super interesting, though, that you've had those experts come out and they weren't able to identify exactly what's going on. I think it's pretty amazing.
So I wonder, too, there was one episode where I think Dr. Travis Taylor had, you guys opened something and there was a high level of radiation. He actually had some blisters on his skin. And then later that section was tested and the radiation levels weren't very high there anymore. Is that normal? I don't know enough about radiation. Would that be something normal that it would go away? Or have you seen other instances of that on the ranch?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, if we have radioactive isotopes in the environment, we don't expect to see sudden transient spikes. We expect to see a level and to just see it localized and remain more or less constant. And so it is that sudden change that makes us suspicious that this is a technological signature or something else. Maybe some event is taking place that is accompanied by a burst of radiation. And you got it right. Travis was examined medically, and as he has shared, the diagnosis was that he had been exposed to what we call ionizing radiation, which is dangerous for our tissues. And then we go back to those locations and we measure nothing elevated over the normal background readings. So indeed, what is responsible for that? That's not natural.
Yeah.
Well, and if it wasn't for those physical symptoms, I mean, we've had many conversations that if it wasn't for those accompanying physical symptoms that he experienced, along with the medical diagnosis by a third party doctor, we would probably be more inclined to think that it's something electromagnetic or some electromagnetic interference that's actually spoofing the device to make it think that it's getting those readings, right? So,
yes, Tom raises a very important point here, and that is we know that even though we may be holding an instrument in our hands that is designed to measure, say, gamma rays, it's designed to detect a certain type of radiation. There's also the possibility of something that Thomas has alluded to called EMI, or electromagnetic interference, that can spoof or cause a device to register gamma hits when in fact it is just excitation from some RF source. So, yeah, you nailed it, Tom. It's interesting. I think it bears mentioning. I hope this doesn't get me in any hot water, but I want to share something about. I want to share something else that isn't widely known, and that is that when that event happened with Dr. Taylor, a lot of the production equipment was affected. Tom's nodding, so you're in on it, Tom. And so I don't want to say too much, but what I'll tell you is that the production equipment, meaning cameras and audio and so forth, were also affected at the same time by whatever that event was.
Well, and Eric, I'll just expound on that a little bit more for the audience. And that, if I remember correctly, it was to the point that the production cameras were not working, and the scene that you're watching on television of that unfolding was actually, one of the producers had the presence of mind to grab his iPhone and record his iPhone. So the footage that you're seeing on TV wasn't gotten by the production cameras. That was filmed on an iPhone, because the production cameras had all been taken offline by whatever it was.
That's crazy. That sort of takes us into our next topic here, which is the scientific investigation and tools that you guys use from the start. And again, it's so hard because there's the show, right? And then there's the existence of this actual ranch where there are actually things happening. And it's hard to make room for both of those. But in the beginning of the show, you guys had a few technological devices, and now, holy moly, you have everything. You're shipping it in from everywhere and having all kinds of people come in. But it does seem like a lot of people lose power or lose signal or what have you whenever you guys go to work, on the triangle or different areas of the ranch. How are you maintaining scientific investigation throughout all of your different explorations on the ranch?
I'll back up to the beginning. Our instrumented vigil on the property began, in a fairly austere way. It was fairly straightforward, simple, nothing over the top. It was actually Thomas who installed the very first surveillance system on the property. And it's your standard, consumer grade CMOS detector-based imaging, cameras, and these, by the way, were superior to the things that had been used previously, just because of the evolution of the technology. So something that a consumer could get their hands on, in that time frame, the 2017 time frame, was as good or better than the old CCD technology that had been used during the NIDS and BASS era. And so Thomas put those things out there, and immediately we started seeing very strange things happening, interference with the equipment. I won't take us too far down that rabbit hole unless you guys are interested in it. But what we've done is take an approach that is, as I like to say, led by the data. When we see things happening in the environment that warrant the deployment of more resources, the addition of more sophisticated equipment, we go ahead and commit to that. So we have expanded the network infrastructure, to include things like fiber optic or Ethernet over coax or Wi-Fi, mesh technology, so that we can put sensors out in the field. My very first test platform was whimsically named Satan, and some people smile at that. That was a nod to Brandon's often dark sense of humor. It meant sentinel assignment, telemetry, and notification. It was basically a system that I put together to monitor and make us aware of seismic and infrasonic, as well as electromagnetic signals, remotely. And we've just built, we've gone well beyond that scope to include things such as we've talked about, including radiation detectors, very sophisticated RF spectrum analyzers, you name it. And so it has grown and is continuing to grow.
Great. And CJ, we have a listener question concerning scientific investigation and research for Erik and Thomas. We're speaking with Erik Bard and Thomas Winterton from The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch. And listener Jason Stifler wants to know, are the radiation spikes and magnetic anomalies occurring at the same time?
That's a really great question, because I think all of us instinctively know that the name of the game has to at least be, to start with, looking for correlations. We have a mantra out here that correlation is not causation. But for goodness sakes, let's see what changes with what. Do we see magnetic transients when we see the radiation spikes? Now, the answer is no. There is no strong correlation between magnetic events and specifically, say, gamma radiation. We haven't detected that. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's just that it has not shown up in the data. But what we have seen that is, I think, relevant to the question, we have seen magnetic transients when we get something showing up in those RF sensitive devices, very low frequency sensitive devices that we carry around, including things like tri-field meters.
Have you had any unexpected findings in your research? Things that just blew your mind?
I'd like Thomas to speak to the question of the unexpected first.
Well, listen, I'm gonna stay in my lane here. I'm in charge of facilities and logistics. I really try to leave the science to the smart guys with the degrees right there. And I'll tell you, for me, any unexplained finding is when I look at Erik and I see the baffled look on his face. I know that what we're witnessing is something phenomenal, even though I may not even understand what it is. So I really look to those guys, and I have to say, I've personally had experiences and witnessed a lot of things that I myself cannot explain, and many days leave me feeling like I'm losing my grasp on reality. That I have to say that I lean heavy on the team, because there's many days where I feel like I'm starting to lose it, and it's nice to have these guys to ground me and to be able to validate that I'm not going crazy, that what we're experiencing is real, even if it's unexplained. But I'm just going to say, for me, any of those unexpected discoveries, I look at these guys, and when I see Erik scratching his head and trying to figure it out, I know it's unexpected.
From what I've seen, the way the series has been cut, they're always cutting to me with a confused look on my face. So you would get the impression that what Thomas said is basically always the case. That we always have something anomalous going on, or something unexpected. But there are 2 points here. Number one, I am convinced, based upon my experience, that there is no degree program in the world that prepares a person to deal with the type of anomalous phenomenology that we see here. So, I like to remind everyone that we are all natural born scientists. At some level, we have the tools within us, just as observers, to take the data, be led by the data. As long as we don't bring a strong, let's say, a confirmation bias, a belief system, or for that matter, science as a disbelief system into the picture, it doesn't really matter what your background is. I have been really schooled, I'll say, and I feel no shame saying this. I am determined to be caught in the act of learning, and very often at the hand of Thomas, Bryant, Caleb, people are noticing things that I may have missed completely in my own data. And that has happened on more than one occasion. Now, as far as really unusual things happening, goodness, we can point to any of the episodes that we've aired, and we'll find within those things that we did not expect. For example, Thomas, I would ask, Tom, did you expect that bulldozer to stop working, when we were doing that excavation exercise?
No, and that whole circumstance, from the time that bulldozer pulled onto the property there was a whole sequence of events that happened before that bulldozer even got on camera. We fought to get that bulldozer batteries. We drained, I think, 12 batteries in under an hour. And anyone that understands heavy equipment, we're talking about the big industrial grade batteries. Put in a brand new set to bring the dozer out the next morning, got it there, batteries went dead, took batteries out, took them in, I think, to Napa, got new set, came back, those went dead. They finally went back, and whatever parts store they were getting these batteries from said, we don't know what you're doing, but this is the last set we're warranting. So we had a lot of strange occurrences leading up to that. And then, of course, what the viewers saw in the episodes. Yeah, I didn't expect any of that.
Yeah, you were barely cutting. It was a very shallow cut that you were making. That should not have caused that bulldozer to bog down the way it did. And so the unexpected takes on many forms. And I guess one of the outcomes that I think really caught us all off guard was what we all saw happen when we invited the astronomers out to the ranch. I mean, goodness, that's about as strange as it gets. It was a very well defined experiment. We were going to watch specific stars as they passed through a region of the sky as viewed from the helipad. And this is a perfect example of a clearly stated, testable, falsifiable hypothesis. We're going to see what's going to happen with the starlight as it passes through what we've been referring to as the anomaly. And what happens? Our attentive focus is on that experiment, and we see something that is classically impossible taking place, which is the selective removal of the specific stars from the closed system guidance computer on those telescopes, just as the stars were about to enter into that region of the sky. How do you explain that? Of course I had a confused look on my face.
Data and data collection has been a big part of our show, but also on the flip side, we have to deal with very speculative aspects of the paranormal. And I'm so interested to know how both of you deal with the need for scientific rigor and what you are trained in terms of the scientific method, and with the more speculative aspects of what this investigation entails. How do you balance those two things?
You heard me say earlier something about there not being a degree program in the world that could prepare an individual to deal with all of the phenomenology here. That's not at all to say that we don't rely heavily on the tools and methods and best practices of science. In my case, we're heavy on physics. One of the real challenges we're facing here, as I would assume all the viewership have picked up on, is that we are dealing very often with one-off phenomena. Meaning we don't have the benefit of statistics. We don't have statistical significance. We have singular events, very often events that are coming, essentially coming out of our blind spot. I don't celebrate that, but I have to admit it. I'm not giving us a pass when it comes to rigor just because our equipment is malfunctioning as often as it is. But I think what's happening is it's telling us perhaps we should be refocusing our efforts and casting a broader net than may originally be in our design. We set out to do an experiment, and as I said, very often the results are perpendicular to what we intended to study. Fortunately, we do have an ongoing monitoring. We have both the video and the audio channels that are going out. In fact, we have people around the world able to come in and actually help us to keep the vigil, watch what is happening on the property, since so much of what has been reported has been of a visible nature, visual. And then, of course, we also have our data acquisition, ongoing with platforms like the ones that I've talked about.
What's so incredible is that for years now, there's been this stigma with UFOs, UAPs, that, well, if there are so many of these happening, how come there's no pictures? How come there's no video? Everybody's got phones now, right? And that's the one thing with your show. I mean, the things you guys have seen, unless you are just completely dramatizing everything and it's all fake, which I really don't believe. I truly believe that what we are seeing on this show, you guys are seeing on the ranch. I mean, that is proof to me that there is something going on. So how do you now deal with all of us wanting to know, tell me what is happening, what is in that mountain, what is happening in the sky, and still trying to honor the show, honor your work, honor your contracts, whatever it may be?
Well, Thomas has I would say that Thomas has a much greater exposure to that kind of questioning and scrutiny than I have, by the simple virtue of the fact that I don't have much of a social media presence at all. And that's by design. I try to stay out of all of that, but I know that Thomas has shared with me that he's received a lot of inquiries through those channels. So Tom, you might be better able to speak to this question than I can.
It's definitely been an adjustment, and there's part of it that I really enjoy, and then there's part of it that's taken some getting used to. I mean, my wife and kids have quit sending me to the store if we need a gallon of milk real quick. I'm not allowed to go get it because um, without fail, somebody in the store will stop me and want to share an experience that they had, or they have a question, pertaining to the show. I've been surprised. I live there in the basin, and I think that's probably been the thing that surprised me the most is over the past, really since the show's come out. So in the last 4 years, the amount of people that have had experiences, some of them very profound and very impactful experiences that have occurred there in the Uinta Basin to them, that up till now they never felt safe enough to share. And most of them, probably 95% of them, all start out with, "Hey, I got to tell you something that happened, but if you tell anybody I said this, I'm going to call you a liar," because they don't want to be labeled as crazy. They don't want to be labeled. I mean, I've heard there's an individual that lives fairly close proximity to the ranch that was chased by a UFO. The story he relayed to me was that he was him and his dad were out irrigating a field late at night, and actually had a craft that came down out of the sky and chased them, and they had to literally jump in the irrigation ditch and swim into the culvert and hide in the culvert for I believe he said they were in there for like an hour before the craft left. So we're talking dramatic things, and I've been most surprised by the sheer volume and number of these, and they're coming from very credible people in the community, grounded, leaders, civic leaders, ecclesiastical leaders. And so that's been surprising, and it's been definitely an adjustment to go. I mean, I'm in Mississippi today, and I'm still getting fielding questions. I'm still fielding questions from people about the show. So everywhere you go, it definitely takes more time to get there and do what it is you're trying to do.
They recognize you even without the hat, huh?
I didn't. I knew this podcast was coming up, and I thought about bringing the hat just for the podcast, but it's take it on the plane and not get it all scratched that I left at home and settled for an easy baseball cap.
It's a big hat.
This might be a loaded question, but have your personal beliefs or your spiritual perspectives been affected by your experiences on Skinwalker Ranch?
Yes.
How so? I mean, if you don't answer that, that's fine.
No, it's a fair question. I don't mind you ask the question. To be honest, I don't know how to answer it really, other than to say that my belief system in everything has had to evolve and update since I've been on the ranch. I've experienced things, I've witnessed things, I've seen things that you can't unsee, you can't unwitness, and it really leaves you at least me questioning, how it all fits together. And I still consider myself very spiritual, but I will say that my religious beliefs and that have definitely evolved a lot over the past few years.
That's kind of a norm we found with most of our guests, that the experiences they've had paranormally have changed their outlook in that particular area.
Yeah. And same thing with hosting this podcast. Like you said, I've had people that I have known forever that once I started this podcast started reaching out to me and going, "Okay, do you really talk about UFOs? Do you really talk about Bigfoot? Do you really talk about these things?" And then they'll share their story with me. So my perspective has completely changed too. And that's one of the reasons. I'm not kidding. I have been binge watched your show over the past couple of weeks, and I've lost so much sleep because my mind has just had to shift so much with the things that you guys are discovering. Once the show is done, once you're done recording, what do you guys hope to discover as you continue your research on Skinwalker Ranch?
Well, I had some thoughts as I was listening to Thomas's answer concerning beliefs.
Yes.
And I think I'll start from there.
Yes.
And move into your question. I'm searching for a graceful way to address that really important question about how we engage with the unknown. And I guess the experience has, for me, driven home the idea that perhaps the beginnings of spirituality are honesty with the self. It's very humbling to have to actually take inventory and say, what do I really know? What do I think, and how do I know? Why do I think what I think? And the term that I often use is epistemic humility. It's kind of a fancy pair of words, but quite useful and quite relevant here. And that is, do we perhaps draw the lines between the data points in a way that is counterproductive? Sometimes we're tempted to do that. I do that. I think we all do. I have an expression that I use. I say sometimes we end up creating constellations of facts, where the facts themselves are like the stars in that constellation. And we draw those connective lines because it helps us to get our minds around it. And so that leads into my answer to the question. We have facts. We have these one-off events that I've described. We have these data points. And so I think it would be fair to say for all of us that what we're hoping to do is to connect those facts in the most truthful way, not just create artwork that suits us, not just draw any constellation that we can from them, but to actually find the real underlying connectivity between all these things that are happening. I guess for me, it could be summarized in fewer words. I'm looking for an explanation that has what we call unifying appeal, if possible, to find one cause that could give rise to all of the many different things that we see, because they sure do seem different.
I love that. Albert Einstein would be so proud of that answer. The one thing that united them all.
They are so different. I mean, you've got the Skinwalker, then you have the UAPs, then you have the radiation. So there's so many things going on. It's amazing. I tell you what really stunned me was the helicopter and the UAP flying underneath. It was visible. You could see that the UAP was underneath. And if I'm not mistaken, then the instrumentation of the helicopter kind of go crazy during that. And I mean, to see that pass underneath there, I was just shocked. I mean, that was one of the episodes that shocked me.
You and me both. I was genuinely nervous, and I think you could hear it in my commentary on that helicopter when you're talking about when that ground collision avoidance system was signaling that we had something as close as 39, 40 feet below the helicopter. When we were at 4,600 to 4,800 feet above the ground. I think they caught me saying, "What the hell is under us?" And that's all very real. I was concerned. We were feeling there was a lot going on there in what you see, and we were feeling that vibration. Cameron talked about the buffeting, the vorticity, the rotation in the air. It was very much as if we were not up there alone, and that's the kind of thing where when you're at nearly 5,000 feet above ground level, that starts to matter.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. For me, it's the UFOs. They're UAPs that just disappear, like they're going into a portal of some sort. You see them and then whoosh, they're just gone. I really wanted to.
Yes, I just wanted to close out the scientific investigation and research portion of this show by first a listener comment here, and it's a perfect segue to my question for you guys. And so I just got a kick out of this. Tom Akers says, I really hope this reminds me of the mean tweets segments you see online, by the way, sometimes. I really hope we get some kind of answers this season, because I don't want this show to turn into that Oak Island show where it always is close, but nothing comes out of it.
I promise no coconut fiber.
So, I thought that was a perfect segue to close out the scientific part of this show with this question. Guys, what do you hope to achieve with the ongoing scientific investigation of Skinwalker Ranch?
To be continued.
You've been listening to All Things Unexplained. If you liked this podcast, please do give us a 5-star rating and leave us a review. If you would like to hear more All Things Unexplained, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Our show depends on the support of listeners like you. Find us on Venmo under the business accounts at Bigfoot UFO. If you can't get enough of us, please check us out at allthings-unexplained.com. A special thanks to our producer, director, sound mixer, editor, and the man who wears far too many hats. No, seriously, he wears a lot of hats. Dr. Tim Mounts. Without you, we couldn't keep the lights on. Thanks for listening to All Things Unexplained.